Sometimes, even the most calculated criminal can seemingly get away with murder, but then decades later face their own downfall thanks to their own ego. It's also come to our attention that 93% of our viewers aren't subscribed, so please just take the time to click that subscribe button and make sure all notifications are on so you never miss an upload every Monday, Wednesday and Friday. Dennis Lynn Rader was born on March the 9th, 1945 in Pittsburgh, Kansas to parents Dorothea and William, the eldest of 4 boys, though he and his siblings would grow up mainly in Wichita. Dennis would later claim that during childhood he was ignored by his mother and that both parents worked long hours and hardly paid any attention to any of their children. From a young age he began to have sadistic sexual fantasies involving torturing trapped and helpless women, as well as gaining sexual satisfaction in torturing, killing and hanging small animals.
Use the term fantasy. Is this something you were doing for your personal pleasure?
Sexual fantasy, sir.
He had a fascination with voyeurism, autoerotic asphyxiation and cross-dressing, often spying on female neighbours whilst wearing women's clothing, including underwear that he had stolen. Rader also began to masturbate while wearing ropes and other bindings around his arms and neck. Despite this, in the public eye he was well liked in his local community, with many describing him as, quote, normal, polite and well-mannered, end quote. He ended up graduating from Wichita Heights High School before attending Kansas Wesleyan University, where he received mediocre grades and soon dropped out after just 1 year. Between 1966 and 1970, Dennis Rader served in the United States Air Force, but once discharged, he moved over to Park City, where he gained employment in the meat department of an IGA supermarket, where his mother also worked as a bookkeeper. It was on May the 22nd, 1971 when Dennis Rader married Paula Dietz, before the couple would go on to have 2 children together, Kerry and Brian. He attended the Butler County Community College in El Dorado, where he earned an associate degree in electronics engineering in 1973, before gaining work as an assembler for outdoor supply business the Coleman Company. It was the following year when he gained work at the local Wichita office of ADT Security Services, installing security alarms. But it was now when Dennis Rader began his rampage.
This particular location, did you know these people?
No, that was part of my, I guess my what you call fantasy. These people were selected.
Dennis Rader had previously spotted 33-year-old Julie Marie Otero leaving her Wichita home to take her children to school, and he followed her back to her house. For 2 months he began to stalk her and made up his mind that she was going to be his target. On January the 15th, 1974, Rader cut the family's phone lines, and once he saw Julie's 9-year-old son Joey open the back door for the family dog, he made his move and entered the home, which also contained Julie's 38-year-old husband Joseph Sr. and her 11-year-old daughter Josie.
Broke into the house, or didn't break into the house, but when they came out of the house, I came in and confronted the family, and then we went from there. He
quickly informed the family that he was a wanted man in California before forcing them down onto the floor at gunpoint.
The dog was a real problem, so I asked Mr. Otero if he could get the dog out, so he had one of the kids put it out. And then I took him back to the bedroom.
You took who back to the bedroom?
The family.
Joseph and Julie both had their wrists and feet bound, while the former's head was covered by a plastic bag before securing it with some ropes.
Had you planned this beforehand?
To some degree, yes. After I got in the house, I lost control of it, but it was, you know, in the back of my mind, I had some ideas what I was going to do.
Joseph wasn't going down without a fight and actually managed to chew through the bag before Rader tightened another one over him, causing him to slowly suffocate to death.
Tried to make Mr. Otero as comfortable as I could. Apparently had a cracked rib from a car accident, so I had him put a pillow down for his head. I think I put either a cloth or a t-shirt or something over his head, and then another bag, and then tighten it down.
Did he subsequently die?
Well, yes. I didn't just stay there and watch him. Then I was moving around the room.
Rader then attempted to strangle Julie, but she survived.
I had never strangled anyone before, so I really didn't know how much pressure you had to put on a person or how long it would take. Strangled Mrs. Otero, and she went out, or passed out. I thought she was dead. She passed out. Then I strangled Josephine. She passed out, or I thought she was dead.
Later recalling the event, he stated, quote, Mrs. Otero woke back up. She was pretty upset with what was going on and she asked me to save her son, so I took the bag off. She screamed, "You killed my boy! You killed my boy!" After the initial realization and shock, she communicated, "God have mercy on your soul," before I put her head down permanently. End quote.
She asked me to save her son, so I actually had taken the bag off, and then I was really upset at that point in time.
Dennis Rader then strangled Julie with a rope.
There I realized that, I didn't have a mask on or anything. They already could ID me.
With both parents now dead, he put a plastic bag as well as 2 t-shirts and an extra bag over Joey's head and watched as he thrashed around before following the same fate as his father. He proceeded to lead Josie down into the basement where he hanged her from a noose from a pipe before fleeing the scene.
I went through the house, kind of cleaned it up. It's called the right-hand rule. You go from room to room. Picked everything up. I think I took Mr. Otero's watch. I guess I took a radio. I forgot about that, but apparently I took a radio.
Why did you take these things?
I don't know.
3 of the family's older children who were at school at the time of the murders returned home to make the grisly discovery. Investigators found some semen near Josie's partially clothed body, but they had no leads, and this murder at the time went unsolved for decades. Rader did, however, write a letter describing the murders in great detail before stashing it inside an engineering book in the Wichita Public Library. At some point, he also began to take photographs of himself wearing women's clothing, as well as a female mask whilst tied up. He would later confess to doing this as a way to pretend to be his victims as some kind of sick sexual fantasy. On April the 4th that same year, Rader broke through the screen door of 21-year-old Catherine Doreen Bright in her Wichita home, but was surprised to see her 19-year-old brother Kevin also inside.
I had many, what I called them projects. There were different people in the town that I followed, watched. Kathleen Bright was one of the next targets, I guess, as I would indicate.
How did you select her?
Just driving by one day, and I saw her go in the house with somebody else, and I thought that's a possibility. There was many places in the area, College Hill, they're all over Wichita. But anyway, it just was basically a selection process. Worked toward it. If it didn't work, I just moved on to something else.
Undeterred, he took Catherine into a bedroom and forced Kevin at gunpoint to tie down his sister with a rope.
If I had brought my stuff and used my stuff, Kevin would probably be dead today.
Right.
I'm not bragging on that. It's just a matter of fact. It's the bonds I tied him up with that he broke them. So.
He then attempted to strangle her, but she began to struggle too much, leading to Rader instead stabbing her 3 times in the back and lower abdomen. He proceeded to strangle Kevin before shooting him in the head. Amazingly, he survived, but pretended to be dead.
I think I just went back to check on Kevin, or at that basically same time I heard him escape. It could be one of the two. But all of a sudden the front door of the house was open and he was gone.
Before he could finally make his escape.
I thought the police were coming at that time. I heard the door open. I thought, no, that's it. And I stepped out there, and I could see him running down the street, so I quickly cleaned up everything that I could and left.
He managed to flag down a neighbour before being rushed to hospital to have the bullet urgently removed from his brain and replaced by a metal plate. But Dennis Rader still remained unidentified. It wasn't until Wichita Eagle newspaper employee Don Granger was visiting the local library and he discovered the letter stashed inside, immediately alerting the authorities. The book contained writings such as, quote, "I can't stop it, so the monster goes on and hurts me as well as society. It's a big complicated game my friend the monster plays, putting victims number down, follow them, checking on them, waiting in the dark, waiting, end quote. It also included a postscript which read, quote, "P.S. Since sex criminals do not change their MO or by nature cannot do, so I will not change mine. The code word for me will be bind them, torture them, kill them. BTK, you see, he's at it again," end quote. Over the years, Rader became a member of the Christ Lutheran Church in Wichita, even being elected president of the council, and was also a Cub Scout leader, though he would often use the Scouts as an alibi whenever a death was discovered. On June the 23rd, 1976, 16-year-old Cynthia Dawn Kinney was last seen in Osage, Oklahoma at the local laundromat. Witnesses claim that she had left at 9:30 a.m. before getting into a faded beige 1965 Plymouth Belvedere. She was never seen again. According to Osage Sheriff Eddie Verdon, Dennis Rader was a prime suspect after it turned out that he had been involved in some Boy Scout events in the area at the time. Furthermore, some ADT alarms had been installed across the street where he worked, and he had allegedly fantasized about kidnapping a girl from a laundromat in the past. But he would later deny having any involvement in this disappearance, though it was believed that this was merely to avoid the death penalty, as this had been done over state lines in Oklahoma. Ironically, however, many of the security alarms that Rader was installing were for scared locals concerned about the murders that he himself was committing. On March the 17th, 1977, Dennis found himself another victim as he followed home the 5-year-old son of 25-year-old Shirley Ruth Relford.
Actually, on that one, she was completely random.
Rader entered the home revealing his gun before tying up her 3 children and locking them all in the bathroom.
I told him I was a private detective. Showed him a picture that I had just showed the boy and asked him if they could ID the picture. And at that time I had the gun here and I just kind of forced myself in. I just walked in, just opened the door and walked in. Proceeded to tie the kids up and they started crying and got real upset. So I said, "Oh, this is not going to work." So we moved them to the bathroom. She helped me. And then I tied the doors shut. We put some toys and blankets and odds and ends in there for the kids, make them as comfortable as we could.
He proceeded to take Relford to the rear bedroom where she vomited from panic.
She got sick, threw up, got her a glass of water, comforted her a little bit, and then I went ahead and tied her up and then put a bag over her head and strangled her.
He then tied her to her bedpost by her legs before strangling her with a rope and placing a plastic bag over her head.
Why did you have these potential hits? Was this to gratify some sexual interest? Or?
Yes, sir. I had a lot of them, so it's just, if one didn't work out, I just moved to another one.
The children screamed and banged from down the hallway, and Rader would later admit that his plan was always to murder them as well. But thankfully, they all managed to escape.
The kids were really banging on the door, hollering and screaming, and then the telephone rang, and they had talked about earlier that the neighbors was going to check on them, so I cleaned everything up real quick like and got out of there, left, and went back into my car.
On December the 8th, 1977, Rader knocked on the door of 25-year-old Nancy Jo Fox's Wichita home after having stalked her for a while and deciding that she was a new victim.
When I was trolling the area, I noticed her go in the house one night. If you read much about serial killers, they go through what they call the different phases. That's one of the phases they go through as a trolling stage. You're looking for a victim at that time, and that you could be trolling for months or years. But once you lock in on a certain person, then you become stalking, and that might be several of them. But you really home in on that person. They basically become that's the victim, or that's what you want to do. And then I did a little homework. I dropped by once to check the mailbox to see what her name was. Found out where she worked. Stopped by there once at Hillsburg, and kind of sized her up. The more I knew about a person, the more I felt comfortable with it.
However, nobody answered. He decided to cut the phone lines and then broke in, patiently waiting for her to return.
I confronted her, told her there I had a problem, sexual problem, that I would have to tie her up and have sex with her. She was a little upset. We talked for a while. She smoked a cigarette. While we smoked a cigarette, I went through her purse, identifying some stuff. And she finally said, "Well, let's get this over with so I can go call the police." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Can I go to the bathroom?" And I said, "Yes." She went to the bathroom, and I told her when she came out to make sure that she was undressed. And when she came out, I handcuffed her.
He would later describe this kill as, quote, what I call a perfect hit. Although she gave me a lot of verbal static, she cooperated and she didn't fight me. I had complete control of her. That's why it was one of the more enjoyable kills, as I call them, end quote.
I handcuffed her, had her lay on the bed, and then I tied her feet, and then I was also undressed to a certain degree, and then I got on top of her, and then I reached over, took either her feet were tied or not tied, but anyway, I think I had a belt. I took the belt and then strangled her with a belt at that time.
Rader actually confessed to her that he was responsible for the Otero murders, before strangling her with his own belt on her bed and fleeing the scene.
At that time, masturbated, sir.
All right. Had you had sexual relations with her
No,
before?
no. I told her I was, but I did not.
Strangely, the following day, Dennis called the police from a payphone and informed them of the murder and where they could find her body inside her house. It was on February the 10th, 1978 when Rader's behaviour became even more bizarre, as he decided to send a letter to Wichita television station Cake, confessing to all of the murders. He provided many aliases for himself, including, again, the one that would stick, BTK, standing for Bind, Torture, Kill. In this letter, he also demanded more notoriety. Quote, "How many do I have to kill before I get a name in the paper or some national attention?" End quote. He also enclosed a poem entitled "Oh Death to Nancy," parodying the lyrics of American folk song Oh Death. He claimed to have been driven to kill by Factor X, which supposedly also motivated murderers Jack the Ripper, the son of Sam, and the Hillside Stranglers. During his enticement for a game of cat and mouse, he also requested authorities to send him a hidden message. Considering they now knew that he watched their television broadcast, they chose to flash a subliminal message during one of their evening newscasts for just a split second. This message read, quote, "Now call the chief," end quote, alongside a drawn upside down pair of sunglasses, which had been discovered at one of the crime scenes. They held out hope that this would be enough to convince the murderer to hand themselves in. But there was no such luck. It was in 1979 when Rader's facade of a regular life continued as he graduated from Wichita State University with a Bachelor of Science degree, ironically majoring in the administration of justice. It was that same year when he had obsessively been stalking 63-year-old Anna Williams and broke into her home. However, she was out much later than expected, partying with some friends. Rader waited inside her house for hours before giving up and going home, later admitting to being absolutely livid that she had managed to avoid him. It was on April the 27th, 1985 when he murdered 53-year-old Maureen Hedge at East 53rd Street North in Wichita.
Since she lived down the street from me, I could watch the coming and going quite easily. Lo and behold, her car was there. I thought, gee, she's not supposed to be home. So I very carefully snuck into the house, kind of like a cat burglar. And after checking the house, she wasn't there. So about that time, the doors rattled. So went back to one of the bedrooms and hid back there in one of the bedrooms. She came in with a male visitor. They were there for maybe an hour or so. He left. I waited till wee hours in the morning and then proceeded to sneak into her bedroom and flip the lights on real quick, like, or I think the bathroom lights. I didn't want to flip her lights on, and she screamed, and I jumped on the bed and strangled her manually.
You indicated this woman lived down the street from you. Did she know you?
Casually, we'd walk by and wave. She liked to work in her yard as well as I liked to work. It's just a neighborly type thing. It wasn't anything personal. I mean, just a neighbor.
Before transporting her body to Christ Lutheran Church.
She was nude. I put her on a blanket, went through her purse, some personal items in the house, figured out how I was going to get her out of there. Eventually moved her to the trunk of the car. Took the car over to Christ Lutheran Church. This is with the older church. And took some pictures of her.
There, he photographed her body in various suggestive positions before dumping the remains in a remote ditch. Rader would later confess to storing black plastic sheets and other materials at the church specifically for this murder. On September the 16th, 1986, Rader pretended to be a telephone repairman in order to gain entry to the Wichita home of 28-year-old Vicki Lynn Wegerle.
I used a ruse as a telephone repairman to get in their house. Drove there in my own personal car around lunchtime. Went over and found out where the telephone was, simulated that I was checking the telephone. I had a make-believe instrument, and after she was looking away, I drew a pistol at her and asked her if she'd go back to the bedroom with me.
He would then strangle her with a nylon stocking before rearranging her clothes and taking photographs of her naked body.
There was a lot of commotion. She had mentioned something about her husband coming home. So I got out there pretty quick. The dogs were raising a lot of cane in the back. The doors and the windows were all open to the house. There was a lot of noise when we were fighting. So I left pretty quickly after that. Put everything in the briefcase and had her. I'd already gone through her purse and got the keys to the car and used their car for my getaway car.
It was on January the 19th, 1991 when Rader attacked 62-year-old Dolores Erline Davis and strangled her with some pantyhose before disposing of her remains in Park City.
Very cold at night. Had reservations about going in. I I had cased the place before, and I really couldn't figure out how to get in, and she was in the house, so I finally just selected a concrete block and threw it through the plate glass window on the east and came on in. Kind of talked to her, told her that I would like to get some food, get her keys to her car, and kind of rest assured, talked with her a little bit and calmed her down a little bit. I moved her to one spot, took her out of her car. This gets complicated. The stuff I had, clothes, gun, whatever, I took that to another spot in her car, dumped that off, then took her car back to her house. In the interim, I realized that I had lost one of my guns. I dropped it somewhere. So I was trying to figure out where my gun was. So I went back in the house, realized I had dropped it when I broke the plate glass window. It dropped and fell on the floor right there, and I found it right there. So that solved that problem. Anyway, I went back out, threw the keys, checked the car real quick, and threw the keys up on top of the roof of her house, walked from her car back to my car, took my car, drove it back, and I either dropped more stuff off or I picked her up and put them in my car. And then I drove up northeast of Sedgwick County and dropped her off underneath the bridge.
It's no secret that there was always gaps in between his murders, but for whatever reason, this seemed to be the end of his rampage. But it didn't stop Rader from continuing to play cat and mouse with investigators, which, unbeknownst to him at the time, would lead to his own downfall. It was in May 1991 when Rader became a dog catcher and compliance officer in Park City, though he began to receive several complaints. Some neighbours described him as often being overzealous and extremely strict, claiming that he seemed to take special pleasure in bullying and harassing single women. 3 women filed restraining orders against the man, one of which even changed her address because of his stalking behaviour, and another neighbour claimed that he had even killed their dog for seemingly no reason.
All of these incidents, these 10 counts, occurred because you wanted to satisfy a sexual fantasy. Is that correct?
Yes.
It was in 1996, 5 years since his last kill, when the son of his final victim, Jeff Davis, mustered up the courage to write a book based on his trauma from the event. It didn't gain a lot of attention at the time, but he did receive a letter from someone simply referred to as a taxpayer, expressing sympathy, but only because it unfortunately wasn't accepted onto the television show Unsolved Mysteries, claiming that it, quote, would have adapted well to the screen, end quote. The letter also referred to the murderer and what they, quote, might say if you could actually talk to him, end quote. And it was later confirmed to have come from Dennis Rader himself. As the 90s ended and the 2000s rolled around, the public shockingly seemed to forget about the BTK killer and his rampage. However, author Robert Beatty began writing a book about the killing spree titled Nightmare in Wichita, as he had spoken with many young people in the area and was shocked to discover that they hadn't even heard of the story. Unfortunately, it was this book that led to Dennis Rader returning to the spotlight. In March 2004, the Wichita Eagle received a letter directly from somebody claiming to be called Bill Thomas Kilman, trying to take responsibility for the murder of Vicky Wegerle back in 1986, enclosing photographs of the crime scene and even a photocopy of her driver's license, which had been stolen at the time of the killing. This was actually the first time that this murder was linked to the BTK case. DNA had been discovered underneath her fingernails, but the evidence was inconclusive. They began DNA testing hundreds of men to try to find the culprit, and with 1,300 DNA samples, no match was found. By May, Cake then received a letter of their own with some chapter headings for the BTK story, some fake IDs and a bizarre word puzzle. The games would only continue on June the 9th when a package was found taped to a stop sign at the corner of 1st and Kansas roads in Wichita, containing graphic descriptions of the Otero murders, as well as a sketch labelled, quote, "The sexual thrill is my bill," end quote. It also contained another chapter list for a proposed book entitled The BTK Story. In July, another package was dropped into the return slot at a public library containing claims that the BTK killer was also responsible for the death of 19-year-old Jake Allen in Argonia, Kansas, earlier that same month. However, this claim was proven false and his death concluded to have been a suicide. Rader would later claim that he had been stalking his first victim in over a decade at this point and was aiming to kill in October, but this never happened. Instead, that month, a manila envelope was dropped into the UPS box in Wichita containing images of the bondage of children, a poem threatening the life of lead investigator Lieutenant Ken Landwehr, as well as a fake autobiography of the BTK Killer, though these were never released to the public. In December, the Wichita police received yet another package from Rader in Murdoch Park containing Nancy Fox's driver's license, which had also been stolen, as well as a doll which was bound at the hands and feet with a plastic bag tied over its head. However, Dennis may have gotten a bit carried away because he was about to make a huge mistake. In January 2005, he left a cereal box in the bed of a pickup truck at a Home Depot in Wichita, though the owner of the truck discovered it and got rid of the box. Rader, however, couldn't help himself and contacted investigators asking what happened to it. This led to them checking the CCTV in the area to see a distant figure driving a black Jeep Cherokee, leaving it behind. In February, more postcards were sent to Cake, as well as another cereal box containing another bound doll. Rader even went as far as to write another letter asking investigators if his writings could be traced if they were put onto a floppy disk. Police officers did respond in a newspaper ad in the Eagle claiming that they couldn't and that it would be safe to do so. On February the 16th, 2005, Dennis Rader sent a purple 1.44 megabyte Memorex floppy disk to Wichita station KSAS-TV with a letter enclosed, as well as a gold-coloured necklace with a large medallion and a photocopy of Rules of Prey, which is a 1989 John Sanford novel about a serial killer. On the disk, investigators discovered metadata embedded in a deleted Microsoft Word document, which Rader was unaware was still on the disk. This data contained the words Christ Lutheran Church and had last been modified by a Dennis.
The evidence was there earlier, DNA, the floppy. There was no way that I was going to get out of this.
After some online searching, they were able to find Dennis Rader, who was a member of the church, and once driving past his home, they saw a black Jeep Cherokee outside. However, despite this being extremely circumstantial evidence, they needed more direct evidence in order to make an arrest. They were able to obtain a warrant to test a pap smear taken from his daughter at the Kansas State University Medical Clinic, and the DNA test showed a familial match between the pap smear and the DNA under Wegerle's fingernails, concluding that the killer was closely related to Rader's daughter. They had everything they needed.
Sore spot with me when they took my daughter, but I understand in law enforcement you have to do certain things.
On February the 25th, 2005, Dennis Rader was driving near his home in Park City just after noon when he was pulled over and arrested. An officer asked him, quote, "Mr. Rader, do you know why you're going downtown?" End quote. To which he responded, quote, "Oh, I have suspicions why," end quote.
Even though I'm a criminal, I think you have to appreciate the police department. They've done a lot of work. Even though it took a long time, they gathered evidence, they had that evidence. When they got the key suspect, they zeroed in on it very rapidly.
Wichita police officers, the Kansas Bureau of Investigations, the FBI and Alcohol, Tobacco and Firearms or ATF agents all searched his home and vehicle, seizing his computer equipment, as well as finding a pair of black pantyhose in a shed and a cylindrical container, as well as searching the Christ Lutheran Church, his office and the main branch of the Park City Library. It was confirmed the next day that they had their man.
I will find that you understand the nature of the charges and the consequences of your pleas. Based upon your statements to the court, I will find there are factual bases for each of these pleas of guilty. I will accept these pleas of guilty and adjudge you Dennis L. Rader guilty of murder in the first degree in count 1, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 2, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 3, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 4, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 5, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 6, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 7, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 8, a Class A felony, murder in the first degree in count 9, a Class A felony, and murder in the first degree in count 10, a Class A felony.
On February the 28th, 2005, Dennis Rader was charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder. The Associated Press claimed to have received an anonymous tip suggesting that he had also confessed to some other killings that previously hadn't been connected to the BTK case. But the Sedgwick County District Attorney denied this, though they were still looking into other unsolved murders. On March the 5th, it was confirmed that he had confessed to the 10 but no others. On May the 3rd, the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, as Rader did not speak at his arraignment, but on June the 27th he changed his plea to guilty, describing all of the murders in great detail, but he never apologized.
Nancy Fox, she was a wonderful person, and I did track her just like a predator. She was a wonderful young lady.
It was on July the 26th when his wife was granted an emergency divorce, waiving the standard 60-day waiting period. Massachusetts psychologist Robert Mendoza was hired to conduct a psychological evaluation of Dennis Rader to determine if he could plead insanity. After a recorded interview, he diagnosed Rader with narcissistic, obsessive-compulsive and antisocial personality disorders. He claimed that Rader attributes a grandiose sense of self, a belief that he is special and therefore entitled to special treatment, a pathological need for attention and admiration, as well as a complete lack of empathy. However, this came with its own string of issues. The videotape of the interview was used on NBC's Dateline, claiming that Rader was fully aware that it might be televised. But this was not true, according to the county sheriff's office. This led to Mendoza and Tali Waters, the co-owners of the Cambridge Forensic Consultants LLC, for breach of contract, accusing them of financially benefiting off of the information they gained from defending Rader. Mendoza would always deny any wrongdoing, but he would later settle the case for $30,000. On August the 18th, the families of the victims made their statements, and Dennis Rader finally apologized in a 30-minute long monologue, though most weren't convinced, comparing it to an Academy Awards acceptance speech, describing his behavior as an often observed phenomenon among psychopaths, with the inability to understand the emotional content of language.
I finally apologize to the victims' families. There's no way that I can ever repay them. That's all, sir.
Dennis Rader was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences with a minimum of 175 years. But Kansas did not enforce the death penalty at the time, and he was left to die in prison.
And by him delivered to the custody of the Secretary of Corrections to serve a term of life for which he will not be parole eligible until the expiration of 40 years.
The following day, he was moved to the El Dorado Correctional Facility, and allegedly during the drive, he casually discussed the weather, until the statements from the victims' families once again came on the radio and he broke down crying. Rader was put in solitary confinement for his own protection, with just 1 hour of exercise permitted per day and 3 showers a week. However, just 1 year into his sentence, he was given television and radio access, as well as the privilege to read magazines due to his good behaviour. The Wichita police continued to try to solve any unsolved cases in the area or the surrounding states, but they focused more on the cases after 1994, as this was when the death penalty was reinstated in Kansas. They searched for any murder that resembled Dennis Rader's motif, but found none. Most believed that he truly was only responsible for the 10 that he had confessed to, though Rader did admit to having planned others which were unsuccessful. He claimed to have stalked a person but had to cancel the murder as he saw construction and road crew were nearby, stating, quote, "There are a lot of lucky people," end quote. It was in 2019 when Dennis's daughter Kerry did an interview with ABC News, admitting that she writes to her father and has managed to forgive him, but still struggles to come to terms with her normal childhood, knowing that she was raised by the BTK Killer. Quote, "I had to learn how to grieve a man that was not dead, somebody I loved very much that no one else loved anymore," end quote. Though she would later reveal excerpts from his journal where he subtly confesses to sexually abusing her around the age of 2. She discovered photos Rader had taken of himself in women's clothing strangling a doll, and was convinced that he had performed those acts on her. Quote, "When I saw the photo this summer, I knew that's what he had done to me, and I've had that stuck in me, this image of something happening to me when I was little, and I've always had an issue with my neck," end quote. Though Rader denies ever harming any of his family, Kerry maintains that this is a lie. Quote, "But we know that he strangled my brother twice as a young adult. I saw that. I witnessed it. So between the trauma I've had, this thing embedded in me, the disassociation, the night terrors, I'm 100% sure he harmed me when I was little." End quote. Dennis's son Brian has never spoken publicly, though according to Kerry, he doesn't have a family and has always struggled to come to terms with this. It was on August the 23rd, 2023 when Rader's former home in Park City was searched yet again for more clues, and investigators supposedly discovered potential trophies of other unsolved murder victims, though nothing is for certain. Kerry claims that today Dennis's health has dropped and he is currently in a wheelchair, and she actively speaks out in support of the victims, raising awareness for such horrific crimes. But that doesn't stop the questions pouring in regarding how a beloved and supposed wholesome family man can stoop to such horrific lows and leave the world seeking answers.